Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar in which I'll be discussing a specific textbook, Essential Mathematics for Economics and Business, and this is actually the 4th edition of the book. Now the author is Teresa Bradley, and we're just going to go through some slides here discussing her text and how it relates to Maplesoft's Maple T.A, or Online Testing and Assessment Solution. So without further delay, let me begin with the first slide. Now this text provides a broad introduction to mathematical methods with hundreds of applications, specifically mainly in economics and business itself. Now the user-friendly approach combined with practical application caters specifically for students who are apprehensive about mathematics itself, as well as for students whose backgrounds are not mathematical. A lot of students going into business and economics may not have the same math background as other students who have studied extensively math itself. Now this is also a text that's for students who are mature, whose math skills may have a little rusty. Perhaps they went to work for several years and then decided to go back to school afterwards, and they're using this textbook now, and they haven't done some mathematical applications in several years. So this is a textbook that is catered to these 3 different groups of students who are using it. Now, each chapter in this textbook is set out as follows. The first thing you'll see is a short overview. Now, this overview briefly outlines the mathematical topics with some real-world applications in some business and economics. Students who are apprehensive and wonder, why do we need math anyway, need to be reassured that math is not just useful but necessary for a clear and comprehensive understanding of other subjects on their actual course. Now, the other part is explanation. So this is important to understand the rationale underlying the mathematical techniques and methods in order to become confident and proficient in the text. So in the text, plausible explanations are given for each new topic and then demonstrated in a detailed worked example. Now in these worked examples, explanations and comments in everyday language are interjected throughout to help the student learn these more formal mathematical terms. And then there's exercises, which are used for practice. Practice itself is essential to develop fluency and confidence in any area, whether it is, for example, swimming, football, music, cooking, and even math itself. So the text contains progress exercises at appropriate points throughout the chapters. These things require answers, and in many cases, the solutions are given at the back of the textbook. Now, the Maple T.A question bank is a very valuable resource for students and will be explained in more detail in the next few slides. Then there's the application part. This is where the student applies the basic maths immediately. So at first, they're applied to simple everyday situations, then progressively to more advanced economic and business models. Now, this is a motivating factor for students to see that math itself is essential in order to study subjects in business and economics to a more analytical level. Now again, practice is vital. Applications introduce a further layer of ideas and terminology which can then take time to absorb. Now, the Maple T.A question bank, which I referenced before, this is an online resource for the 4th edition of this textbook, Mathematics of Economics and Business. Now, these interactive questions allow students to practice at their pace in their own time, as well as spend time on topics that they may find difficult themselves. So in the question bank, all the questions are algorithmic. So what this means is, one template may produce hundreds of similar questions by randomizing numbers or variable names. There's also different question types that cater for different learning styles and also give the student a more comprehensive understanding of the math and applications. Now, answers are given to all the questions. As well, feedback in the form of detailed solutions is given to many of the longer questions so that the student can learn and is not abandoned or left feeling hopeless and frustrated if they get the question wrong. Now, the Maple T.A virtual learning environment, the VLE, will be described in later slides with some screenshots. So the first chapter is mathematical preliminaries. So it is absolutely essential that students are skilled in basic arithmetic and algebra, as these are the fundamentals of mathematics covered in later chapters and applications. If a student is hesitant about any aspect of basic arithmetic, particularly fractions, simplifying algebraic expressions, the concept of an equation, transposition of formulae, etc., then they may feel frustrated in understanding more advanced methods and will find applications more difficult. Now, it is easy to forget mathematics, so this chapter serves as a refresher for those who have not used math in quite some time. Now, applications that we encounter every day include percentages and currency conversion. It is important to verbalize and listen carefully to the logic underlying the problem before putting pen to paper and attempting the calculations. The chapter finishes with an introduction Excel, which students should find useful for calculations and especially for graph plotting in later chapters. Now we can explain the Maple T.A question types used in Chapter 1 itself. Now this includes multiple selection questions. Now students are asked to select two or more expressions that are equivalent to the given in the question. So this requires the skill to simplify to different levels and recognize equivalent expressions. Question designer questions. So this type of question requires one or more input or one or more answers to a question, or the question itself may contain short questions. So it may be a multi-part question, if you would. And then there are adaptive questions. So this is a question with at least two parts, where the student must submit a response to each successive section before the next section of this question is displayed. So in order to get to the second part, they have to answer the first part. Now, let's just show a quick example of each question type from Chapter 1. So here is a multiple selection question. As you can see, this question requires the student to use a variety of skills, simplify in different ways, and find two expressions that are equivalent to that given. As you can see on the screen, they would just select the box to each one that are equivalent to the following expression. Next, this is a question designer type. Now this question requires 4 answers, which may be attempted in any order. So answers may be reviewed and changed before submitting the entire question itself. Now in this case, equal marks are awarded for each correct answer, so one part isn't worth more than the other. And lastly, an adaptive question type. As mentioned earlier, each section of this question is rolled out on submission of a response to the previous section. So in this particular example, the system displays a correct answer to each completed section when the next answer is displayed. Now the marks per section will vary depending on the level of difficulty, depth of knowledge, etc. So as you can see in this part right here, this is a 4-part question. If a student cannot answer, the response box may be left blank. So in essence, guesswork isn't necessary. So this is section 1, and what they do here is they type in the answer and they would click verify to proceed to the next part. As you can see, when they click verify, answers to part 1 or section 1 are displayed, and then they go on to section 2. Here in section 2, they type in their answers, and again, they click the verify button. Like before, they're now shown the answers to section 2, and now they can go to section 3. Same thing as before, they type in their response to to section 3, and click the verify button, and then they'll see the final part, section 4, as well as the answers to section 3, and here they can now type in their answer and click the verify button. Now chapter 2 deals with linear functions and applications. So graphs are used extensively in this and later chapters to enhance understanding by visualization. Students are encouraged to verbalize terms such as slope and intercept, as these terms will be used in actual applications. Now numerous applications such as cost, revenue, profit, demand, and supply are introduced in this particular chapter. It is important to understand how these concepts are modeled by simple linear functions because same concepts will be used with more advanced math in later chapters. Now Maple T.A again provides lots of practice with both the mathematics and the applications itself. So here's a question. For example, this slide will demonstrate measuring slope. How to calculate its numerical value and then describe the slope visually. So for example, we know that slope is the change in height divided by the change in distance. So it's equal to the difference of y over the difference of x. Now if you're given a plot, for example, with a line and you want to calculate the slope of it, well, what you can do is you can first find the change in the height, the change in the distance. Then we can find that the line AB, the slope, is equal to 2 over 4 or 0.5. Just like so. And then the slope in this line, CD, is equal to negative 6 over 5. Again, the change in the height over the change in the distance was equal to negative 1.2. Now in this case, the slope, a half, so y increases by 0.5 when x increases by 1. For this line right here, slope is equal to negative 6.5. So this means that y decreases by 1.2 when x increases by 1. Now, types of questions that we use here for Maple T.A. Matching questions again. So, for example, the following question you'll see on the next slide involves matching the equation of a line to its graph, and it tests whether the student has gained a good understanding of the concepts. So, slope and intercept. So as you can see on this page, here is the matching question. They're asked to match each of the following graphs to one of the linear functions from the list. As you can see, there are 6 different lines shown, and they're simply asked to identify the equation that relates to each line. They use the drop-down menus at each part to select the correct answer. We also use Question Designer here in question 2. Again, we now look at ideas from the real world, starting with the familiar cost, revenue, and profit, all of which may be modeled by linear functions. So as you can see, the next page features our question in Maple T.A. It's a multi-part question, but it's a real-world question. This gives practice at writing down the mathematical formula to model cost, revenue, profit, and the relationships between them. So even if the student cannot answer all the parts, they can submit the question for grading, and then the answers will be displayed. So even if they get things wrong or incorrect, or they don't even know the answers, they can still submit the answers to see the solutions. So if they do that, you'll see that even if they leave it blank, here are the correct answers on the right-hand side. It just helps them to understand the concepts behind what they're missing here. Now, applications of matching questions in Chapter 2. So the following question brings together linear functions and applications graphically. So as you can see, this is a simple matching question where they're asked to match each of the following graphs with their functions to the drop-down menus. Now these are actual functions they would see in a textbook for economics and business. There's things related to profit and revenue and cost. Now Chapter 3 in the text deals with simultaneous equations and applications. So mathematics, simultaneous linear equations. It starts with basically the methods of solution, both analytically and graphically, and then explores cases where there is no solution and in others where there are infinitely many solutions. Now the applications here are based on cost, revenue, demand and supply from Chapter 2 are further developed as well. For example, the price and quantity at break-even may be determined from the cost and revenue functions. From demand and supply functions, we can then study consumer and producer surplus, price ceilings, and price floors, and black market profit. Now, practice with Maple T.A. questions is essential again to gain a thorough grasp of the math and more especially the applications themselves. So, for example, here is an adaptive section. Now, the first part of this question is revision on the formula for the cost, revenue, and profit functions. Now, what happens here is in section 2, the break-even point must be calculated. So in this case, the graph is given to encourage the student to use all information available and check that their answer is roughly correct. We then move on to section 3. Now this continues to test the student's understanding of the concept of slope in the context of variable cost itself. And then we move to section 4. Now in section 4, the students are then tested on their understanding of the concept of both slope and intercept, as well in the context of variable and fixed cost. Chapter 4 moves on to nonlinear functions. So graphs again are featured highly in this chapter to convey the properties of the following functions. Quadratics and cubics, where properties are described and illustrated graphically, followed by methods of solution applications such as total revenue. We then talk about exponential functions, which are extremely important as the models for growth and decay are in almost all aspects of the physical world. Now logs feature less than exponential functions in applications, but nonetheless are important. And lastly, rational and hyperbolic functions introduce the idea of an infinite discontinuity. Now the Maple T.A. question bank offers a more extensive range of applications than the text, where space was limited. So for example, here is another adaptive question. So again, as you can see, graphs are again used instructively to help the student decide whether their answers are reasonable and correct. Now here in section 1, it involves the evaluation of formula by calculator. So equal marks are given for each answer here. They're then taken to section 2 of the question. Now here, the student must solve exponential equations, and there's 2 parts to question 2. Now, chapter 5 deals with financial mathematics. So arithmetic and geometric series. So geometric series form the basis for most of the financial math in this chapter. Compound interest with various conversion periods are introduced as well. Investment appraisal, NPV and IRR. Bonds and interest rates, including mortgages and annuities and sinking funds. I now want to talk about a specific question here at Maple T.A. So Maple T.A. itself offers interactive questions with greater scope and variety than paper-based questions. So some questions require immediate answers, which is required through a thorough understanding of techniques and calculations. Others are worded problems where the reader must decide on the appropriate method to solve and analyze the result. So here, as you can see, the answer is based on the compound interest formula. They can read through this question and then consider the first option. So what is her lump sum worth at the end of 5 years? Section 2 of this adaptive question then asks you to consider option 2 to find the correct answers here. Now this presents a knowledge of present values that students should know by now. And then lastly, section 3 is a simple drop-down question. Now this is based on the previous questions, and it's asking that they find which investment option will yield the highest financial return at the end of 5 years. Chapter 6 deals with differentiation and applications. So the chapter starts with a brief introduction to calculus and instantaneous rates of change for nonlinear functions. So optimization features throughout. The 2 most common methods for finding maxima and minima are explained, and the relationship between them. Now many of the Maple T.A. questions explore the concepts behind the methods and encourage users to adopt a systematic approach to solving problems by requiring intermediate answers at certain key stages of the method. So the applications here are very numerous. So for example, this particular question is related to optimization. So this question designer is introductory and instructive. Comments within the question are given to help the student understand the rationale behind 2 optimization methods, so given in the text itself, and the link between the 2 methods. Now because this is a question designer question, the student can check and review answers before submitting the actual entire question. So as you can see, they're first asked to consider a plot over the interval, and they're first asked to state the coordinate of the minimum point. So as you can see, looking at the plot itself, it's possible for students just to guess the answer. But as you shall see, the focus of this question is to explore certain characteristics of a curve in the neighborhood of a minimum point. They can then move on to part 2 and part 3. As you can see, this isn't an adaptive question where they have to push the verify button after each part. They can answer everything at once and review the entire question or the entire lot before they actually submit it for grading. So in part 2, they're asked to find the derivative, and then in part 3, they use this answer to calculate the value of slope before, at, and after the minimum in part 3. And lastly, the final part, which is part 4, they're asked to consider the change in slope in the neighborhood of a minimum point, and it demonstrates the link between the second derivative test and the slope test. Now another question in chapter 6 is another optimization question, but this one is an adaptive question. So this is designed to guide the student through the method and requires answers at key intermediate stages. So they can't do the entire, part 1, 2, 3, and 4 at the same time. They have to do part 1 first and then move on to part 2. So as you can see, in section 1, they're asked to find a few different things using the above equation. Find the sales are at maximum, the maximum number of magazines sold, sales at the minimum of the week, and the minimum number of magazines sold. Once they do this, they click verify, and they move on to section 2. Now the first step they do here is write down the first and second derivative. As you can see, if they get this part wrong, they're shown the correct answers to part 2, and they can go on to question 3 of this adaptive question. And then lastly, for section 4, again, they're given the answers to part 3 if they get them wrong, but now they can use a second derivative test to determine the nature of the particular 2 stationary points from above. Now, chapter 7 deals with partial differentiation. Now, in particular, we have an example here of an adaptive question on constrained optimization using Lagrange multipliers. So here, as you can see, they're first given a particular equation, in which case Q is the output, L and K are the number of units of labor and capital. So here they're asked to find the values of L and K for which Q is maximized subject to the budget constraint. So here they put the answers for L and Q, as well as the maximum level of production, Q itself. What they then do is they click the verify button, and they're taken to section 2. So here now, they write down the equation, and again, they click the verify button, then they move to section 3. As you can see, they can continue forth and continue to answer the rest of the question until they get to the final part, which shows them the results from section 3. They can then move on to section 4, and they can then solve for L and K. And then hence they'll find the maximum output Q itself. So it's a multiplier question where they have to answer each part individually before proceeding to the next part. Now as you can see, there is also feedback specifically for this question where it explains exactly how the correct answers were found. And here is the rest of the feedback right here. And lastly, the feedback continued again shows the final solution for Q. Now, chapter 8 deals with integration and applications. In terms of concepts, some students find integration itself difficult. The idea that integration is the operation that reverses differentiation is a useful introduction. Now, graphs are used to explain definite integration in terms of area. Now, again, much practice is necessary. Frequently, students have forgotten the simplification covered in earlier chapters and find this more problematic than the actual integration itself. Now, Maple T is particularly useful to refresh memories. So in terms of applications, some applications, such as consumer and producer, were introduced in Chapter 3 for linear functions. An introduction to first-order differential equations and exponential growth and decay are also covered. So here we have a question that introduces definite integration. So in this case, detailed feedback is given for this question so that the student can check their methods and the calculations. For example, here's the question. Here they're basically asked to give a single numeric answer as that's required. They're shown a curve and they're asked to find the area enclosed by the actual arch itself. As you can see, if they get it right or wrong, they're still told the correct answer. Now this is helpful because detailed feedback is provided to help the user identify the errors in which they made. So here is the feedback that shows the comment. It kind of details exactly, where the arch is cut, where it cuts the horizontal at y equals x. It then talks about the area enclosed by the arch given by the actual integral. It then shows how that integral is then integrated. And here's the feedback continued. Now, Chapter 9 deals with linear algebra. So in this case, the following question in Maple T.A. is a question designer question which applies basic linear algebra to an everyday situation of revenue, cost, and profit. So here, as you can see, the question is talking about the number of laptops, iPads, and notebooks, and they're recorded in the following spreadsheet. In the end, they are shown the matrix of the stock. As you can see, the first column of the matrix refers to the laptop stock, second column refers to the iPad stock, and the third column refers to the notebook stock. So the cost price of laptops, iPods, and notebooks for each brand is listed as follows: brand A and brand B. They're then asked to answer part 1 of this question designer question. Now, part 1, they're going to be asked to enter in an actual matrix for their response. And now to enter in a matrix, they do that by using the equation editor itself. So here, as you can see, using the equation editor, they can create a matrix. Now, as you can see, the equation editor allows users to select exactly what dimensions they need for the matrix itself. So if it's a 2x3, they can create their own custom matrices as well. And then when they have the matrix inserted, they simply type in the answer as the elements of the array or matrix. Now in part 2 of this question designer question, again, they're asking to write the data in another 2x3 matrix. So again, to do it again, they would use the equation editor and insert the matrix. And finally, the third question is they're then asked to write down another matrix for which the profit for brand A goods and brand B goods are on the main diagonal. Now, we just have one more chapter to cover right now. Chapter 10, which is difference equations. So the concept of a difference equation and its solution. So question 7 here, 7p in Maple T.A., is a first order difference equation. So for convenience, in this presentation, the question is displayed in 2 columns. The general solution in part 1 is used to find the particular solution in part 2, which in turn is required for the calculations in part 3, and again in part 4. Now it is worth noting that an incorrect answer in part 1 is likely to be propagated in parts 2, 3, and 4, which will almost certainly be incorrect as a result. Now, if this has been written as an adaptive question, it could be more instructive and students would have the opportunity to gain marks in parts 2, 3, and 4 using the correct intermediate results displayed in Maple T.A. However, as you can see here, this is where it displays the answer to the particular question. So that was the 10 chapters covering the text. I just want to provide a summary now. So overall, the Maple T.A. question bank is a further enhancement written to accompany the textbook, Mathematics for Economics and Business. Now for students, it is important to understand the rationale by reading the explanations given in the text and studying the worked examples. You have to remember to practice to become more fluent in the actual text itself and the material presented. Students can also understand the ideas and rationale behind the applications by reading the actual worked examples. Now, the practice questions on applications to become familiar with the ideas and technology of applications is also useful. Now, the wide range of algorithmic questions in Maple T.A. allows students to practice at their own pace and in their own time, whether attending courses or studying independently. Students can also revise topics which they have forgotten or topics which they may not have fully understood and need clarity on. Now, the different question types may be used instructively and to cater for different learning styles. For example, adaptive questions can be designed to give marks for method and not penalize a student completely for an early mistake. Now, for instructors and lecturers, Maple T.A. is a virtual learning environment which caters for large and small groups and students with varied backgrounds and abilities in mathematics. Now, the following slides outline specific features in the Maple T.A. virtual learning environment, such as assignments, tests, and the recording and tracking of students' work. So I want to take about just 5 or 10 minutes now to show you exactly, not just with slides, but how Maple T.A. itself looks for how to deliver assignments and questions, and how to actually track students' work from an instructor point of view. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my Maple T.A. server. I'm going to log in as an instructor. So as you can see, an instructor can log into Maple T.A. and see all of the courses that they are instructing. So as you can see, this particular instructor is currently teaching 5 different classes in Maple T.A. So I'll click on my demonstration class. As you can see, I see all the questions currently available for students to take. And these are assignments, as they are shown right here. I can now manage all the assignments. So here, as you can see, all my assignments are stored in here. I have the option to edit an existing assignment, to make duplicate copies, to delete assignments. I can even hide them, or print off a paper-based version. Now, when I hide an assignment, students will not see this anymore on the class homepage. As you can see, that assignment grouped questions is no longer visible. I can also delete assignments. Now when I delete one, it'll actually permanently delete it from the system so I can't see it anymore at all. Now the question repository. This is where you go to actually manage all the questions you have in Maple T.A. Now these aren't assignments, they're merely just single questions you can use for reference. For example, if we wanted to see all the algebra questions, we can go to that particular group, click on a question, click preview, and we can see exactly how it looks right here. Now, just to give you a better idea of what algorithmic questions mean, as you can see when I click the refresh button, this particular matrix is being changed. This is what algorithmic means. The question itself is the same. We're asked to calculate the determinant of a specific 2x2 matrix, but that matrix itself is different for each student. It kind of gives students an idea that they can try this question multiple times and have a different result at the very end every single time. It's great for study purposes and for helping students understand the particular concept of a question. And lastly, I want to talk about the gradebook, where you can search for class grades. So here, you select the assignment you want to see the grades for, click the search button, and you see the results at the very bottom of your screen. We see the results for assignment A and assignment B. We can then customize it using the advanced search panel or the view panel. So here we can customize what results we see, the progress, a date range, as well as what view we see at the bottom. Do we want to see the student IDs, number of students? Click refresh, and it gets updated below like so. We then click on a specific assignment name. So I can click on assignment A here and see exactly which questions were marked right and wrong from each student. So Maple T.A. has the ability to really manage your class very well. You can manage all the assignments, all the questions, and all the results for your liking.